the season that we saw the 2021 NHL Draft Class finally starting to develop, with a lot of key players becoming NHLers. And today I thought it was the perfect opportunity to redraft the 2021 NHL Draft, going through my top 32 players from the entire class to see which players have fallen, which players have risen from 3 years ago, and which players will become the future of the NHL. So make sure you watch till the end for all of the picks and all the rankings, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for all of the draft content. So much 2024 stuff coming out over the next month, so you won't want to miss a thing. Now, looking back on the 2021 draft, it was honestly one of the hardest drafts I've had to cover on this channel in a long time. Because of the pandemic, a lot of players were in a multitude of different leagues, and specifically with the Canadian Hockey League, it made Canadian players especially hard to get a read on. But that only meant one thing, was that there was going to be a lot of risers and a lot of draft steals in this class, and boy, is that correct. Now, it goes without saying, but of course, with this draft only being 3 years old, these rankings are especially fluid, and even towards the back end, there's quite a few players that aren't even mainstays in the NHL yet, that could be even higher or lower by the time they're there. These are just about pure projections and having fun. I thought the 2021 draft has been especially interesting to look back on, and today I want to make some rankings for it. But now we can officially get inside the top 32, the cream of the crop, and we're going to start out in the C tier. Most of these guys are rather unproven, players that I think have pretty good NHL futures though, even if they aren't NHLers yet. But now starting us off at number 32, a player involved actually in the Jake Guentzel deal, I have Ville Koivunen now of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Interestingly enough, he's actually one of 3 players the Canes drafted in that 2021 class to be inside the top 32. That's insane. On top of Cruz Lucius, I think Ville Koivunen was also another underrated prospect in that package for the Penguins. He's had a couple of great Liga seasons, just using that skill set and the vision to create so much, and just continues to get better and better. Was solid in the playoffs as well. The AHL, I hope he continues to grow into the solid scoring middle 6-piece, maybe even a second liner if all pans out, but a really underrated ad for that. Going on to number 31, we go on to a player I talked about as a really underrated player in the goaltending prospect rankings, and at 31, I have Carl Lindbom of the Vegas Golden Knights. It was a couple of picks away from being a Mr. Irrelevant pick back in 2021, but for Vegas, he's become their best prospect in my opinion. At 20 years old, even though he's on the smaller side, he uses his athleticism incredibly, and you can see how that's provided great results in the Allsvenskan, and then this last year as a full-time SHLer, a .911 save percentage and a solid playoffs too. Lindbom is looking pretty good, folks, and you better jump on the hype train before it's too late. At number 30, I will always love my boy Aatu Räty, somebody that I just loved at 52nd overall for the Islanders, and of course got traded in the Bo Horvat deal. I still am a pretty big believer in him at being a middle 6, responsible center of the future. He's someone that's really rounded out well at Abbotsford in the AHL, 52 points in 72 games this last year, and a solid playoffs as well for them. He's somebody that was really carrying their offense in a lot of ways, and I'm really hoping he's able to turn into an NHLer because that would be good for the brand. I love this man, and I hope he has major success. At number 29, honestly one of the more underrated prospects out there, I got Zachary Leroux, who is somebody that I really liked in his draft year as somebody that was intense, somebody that was great on the puck, somebody that was fantastic around the net, and just drove really good high danger chances. And he's really continued to do that as a 27th overall pick. Sure, are there issues? Are there undisciplined actions? Absolutely. But you look at what he's been able to do, 48 points in 66 games, and he's turned on the playoffs too. 10 points in 6 games, a goal per game as well. Leroux really steps up when it matters most, and I think he will continue to do that in the Preds system and with the Preds someday. At number 28, next up we go on to a Buffalo Sabres product here in Isak Rosen, who's somebody that I think is also kind of going under the radar, just like Leroux in the prospect landscape. But even though he hasn't yet become a full NHLer, I still think there's some great attributes there. You can see what he's been able to do in the AHL, just consistently getting better and better. Got his first 20-goal season this last year, and was solid in the playoffs goal scoring wise too. Rosen to me just has a good pace. He is just a really consistent player offensively. He's somebody that I think has pretty low-key skill, but it comes at you when you least expect it. And I think for the Sabres, especially for a lot of their top-end skill players, Rosen could be a really interesting complementary winger in the future, who I think will aid to a lot of goals in the end. At number 27, next up we go on to the second of the Canes picks from 2021 in Jackson Blake, somebody that is really risen over the past couple of years for me. He's somebody that I didn't really watch as much as I probably should have in his draft year, but he was somebody that was an 109th overall pick and somebody that has really exploded since then. Going to North Dakota, he has been unbelievable. 42 points in his freshman year, then 60 points in his next season. He is going to be an absolute electrifying piece for this Canes team. Offense is what he really provides, speed and intensity, and that's exactly what Carolina needs. I don't think he's quite ready yet for the NHL level, but give him a couple years of seasoning, and I think he could be. At number 26, we go into a much different player, but somebody progressing in the AHL with the Preds as well in Fyodor Svechkov. Somebody that I might not be as high on as I was back in his draft year, but I still love the balance, and I love the complete game that he provides. Really, the big question with Svechkov was how much offense was there going to be, and it seems like he's adjusted well to the AHL. 39 points in 57 games, had a great second half, and also a pretty good playoffs as well with Milwaukee. Svechkov is somebody somewhat of a wild card because I always love the fundamentals, but again, I wanted to see more offense. I wanted to see him really produce at the pro level, and now he's starting to do it. Maybe he rises a bit over the next couple of years and is a sneaky under the radar addition again for the Preds, like a lot of your younger players. At number 25, we're going to go to a guy that I was hardcore underrating in his draft year, and that was Ryker Evans of the Seattle Kraken. And here's the thing, he was an overager in his draft year, and I believe the highest drafted overager. He was somebody that I wasn't able to watch as much as I should have, just because I prioritized draft eligible guys, but he had a great season in 2021 and just continued to get better and better. Had a fantastic freshman year in the AHL, just brilliant there. And that's really when I started to take notice of the puck moving ability, the transitional ability, and also the improvements in his physical play and the strength on him. He's a really balanced D though, and I think for Seattle, even though he won't overwhelm opponents, he's going to get the job done pretty solidly and be a great guy transporting the puck out of his own zone, which is always valuable. Now on to number 24, and a guy that I was overrating a little bit in his draft year, and that is Fabian Lysell. I love the pace, I love the intensity with the puck, and he's one of those players, though, that is just really gifted, really special, really skilled with the puck on his stick, but also isn't really able to slow the game down very well. That's something that I think he's had to work on in the AHL, and I think he's done a pretty good job at that. With Providence this last year, 50 points in 56 games, he's somebody that I think also goes pretty underrated in the prospect landscape, but I think has gotten better and better. He's become a lot more mature, has become a lot more consistent, and I think with that skill set with him, he's still one of the Bruins' best prospects of the future. At number 23, though, we gotta go to my dude, my man, Dylan Duke. Maybe I'm biased, sure, but I've always loved the dog Duke that we're talking about here, man. He just continues to get better and better, and really the big issue for me with his draft year and what he was back then was his skating. How much was he going to be able to get past opponents, especially with his size? That was a concern. But I think he's gotten much, much better in his time with Michigan. They've worked on him incredibly well over there. And you can see this last year, 49 points in 41 games. He just continued to be so good around the net, so good where he does his dirty work. And I think will be a great depth, grindy player for Tampa, but also bringing some underrated skill. And he's somebody that I could honestly see being just this great, consistent 15-year NHL middle six piece that Tampa loves to have at 126 overall. Are you kidding me? Now on to number 22, and somebody that I was a little bit iffy on back in his draft year, that was Scott Morrow, now the Carolina Hurricanes, the final Canes pick inside this top 32, and it's been a long road. There's been a lot of good ones here, but Scott Morrow takes the cake. He's somebody that has really improved over the past couple of years, and he's somebody that I was a little bit iffy on being a high school player. He was dominating then, but I thought was very wiry, had a little bit of lack of really bulk to his frame, and that was something that I really wanted to see him improve on in the NCAA, and man, did he improve on that, with UMass just being a consistent offensive producer. And with the Canes, I think he'll be just this great power play option. I'm not sure how much he'll be able to rise past that, but I think he'll be a good power play middle pair guy who just gets the job done offensively and just brings a lot of electrifying pace. And with Scott Morrow's frame too, and how he's been able to bulk up, he becomes a lot scarier with that. Now we go on to the last player outside the top 21 and the last player inside the C tier. Next up, I go on to Matt Coronato, who I'm still a believer in, and I'm still at 20. I think will be a solid NHLer in the future. He's somebody that has had some struggles here and there, but in the AHL, he's been an incredible producer up to this point and has been a great mainstay with the Calgary Wranglers, whether it be in the regular season or in the playoffs. He's somebody that I've really failed to adapt to the NHL level when he did play earlier. He's somebody that really got out-muscled, somebody that was not able to really establish himself and really put the authority into his play, but I do think it is a matter of time before Coronato is able to do that. I still think he maxes out as probably a decent second line producer, but still, that's pretty good. Now starting us out in the beats here, and starting us out with the top 20, I had to give some appreciation to Josh Doan, another player that I was wrong on. Like Ryker Evans was an overager back in his draft year, a 37th overall by Arizona. It was just an amazing story to see them get the chance to draft this kid with, of course, Shane Doan in the organization, and he's just gotten better and better since his draft year. He's somebody that he didn't really get the most ice time back in his initial draft year, but got better and better in the USHL and was a huge part of Arizona State University. He's somebody that I think has really developed his shot as well, has gotten better and better getting his scoring areas and really asserting himself with that physicality. And I think that's really changed the game with the skills that he already had. He was a great player in Tucson this last year and lit up the NHL when he came over. I don't think it's too much of a consistent thing going forward that he'll stay at that production, but still, I could see him being a solid middle six piece and somebody that Arizona or Utah is really able to build around. Next up, going on to number 19, we go on to the Rangers' 16th overall pick in Brennan Othmann. He's somebody that's developed pretty solidly since he was drafted, but in terms of the physicality, the intensity on the puck, the big hits, the shooting ability, that's really the name of the game when it comes to Othmann and what he's able to bring. He's somebody that I don't think will be much more than just this really consistent, grindy second liner that, again, can chip in a few goals, but still, I think Othmann will be just a really solid piece for the Rangers. And again, a second liner is a pretty freaking good player, and a 16th overall, you're not complaining. Next up, we go on to number 18 and go on to probably one of the most underrated, if not the most underrated product to come out of this draft, and that's Janis Moser. Somebody that was a 60th overall pick by Arizona back in 2021. I think was a double ager or something similar to that, but back when he was drafted, he got 30 points in 48 games in the Swiss League. It was a captain for his team there, and was probably worth a draft pick, especially since Arizona might have wanted to sign him anyways, but he was in the NHL right after that, and was immediately somebody playing games and playing meaningful minutes for them. And although I don't think Moser is an overwhelming defenseman by any means in terms of actual talent, he's somebody that you could just get out there and eat minutes. And to get that at 60th overall is one heck of a steal. Speaking of steals, next up we go on to number 17 in the Montreal Canadiens in Joshua Waugh. Already made a dedicated video about him a little while ago, but he has been so good since he was drafted. Was already somebody that I think was a little bit underrated in his draft year, but I feel like how he's improved his physicality, how he's improved the intensity and his skating, and how he's really developed his entire game. He's just gotten so much better, and you can see from this QMJHL play, you can see with how good he was in the AHL, how good he started out there, and he was fantastic for the Habs when he was called up, bringing just good intensity and incredible work ethic and great smarts, and that's really lended to a lot of success already at the NHL level. And number 16, next up we go on to another pretty under-the-radar guy in Cole Sillinger, somebody that for Columbus was drafted 12th overall, but I think had a pretty underrated year, all things considered, especially in the second half for Columbus. He's somebody that might not light up the lamp with the production. He got 32 points in 77 games, but was somebody that was more in a defensive role for Columbus and shut down the opposition pretty well, especially in the last couple of months. So to find that defensive game, somebody that I think was a lot more offensive back in his draft year, I think that's a pretty good progression. And I still think there's a decent 50-point guy in there somewhere. So if he becomes this great two-way centerman for Columbus, that's a great thing to have. Now getting us inside the top 15. Next up, we go on to Sebastian Cossa. And maybe if we made this video earlier on in the year, Cossa would be a little bit lower down, but he was a player that really started to find his groove at the AHL level for Grand Rapids, getting a .913 save percentage in 40 games. And he's somebody that I still think has a pretty good future. Do I think he's the best goaltender in this draft? No, but I do think he'll be a solid starter in the future for Detroit, and somebody that's quite a bit aggressive, has some great skill in him, and obviously the size is impeccable. We'll see how he progresses, but right now, one of the best goalie prospects in the NHL. At number 14, we go into the last player in the B tier, and next up I got Kent Johnston, somebody that I'm kind of up in the air on in terms of how much value he provides at the NHL level. You see the skill set, you see the creativity, but you also see why he was sent down to the AHL level. Even though he dominated there, there's a lack of consistency, a lack of shift to shift, really intensity and defensive play, and that's going to really pull the hair out of a lot of coaches. But I still think the absolute offensive brain he has is just too much to bet against, and I still think he'll be a great NHL producer for CBJ. Now we move on to the A tier players in this draft class, and this tier is especially close. There's really not much separating any of these prospects. But at number 13, I had to put Brandt Clarke in the last place position in this tier, but really, again, by razor-thin margins. I still think Brandt Clarke will bring a lot of offense and a good brain to the game. I do think there are some issues physically, but you can just see what he was able to do in the AHL and consistently able to do down there. I still think he'll be a good power play and offensive player for LA, though there will be wars in his game, that is for sure. At number 12, next up, I got Simon Edvinsson of the Detroit Red Wings, somebody that I've always loved the balance in his game, and even though there were some issues in his draft year to me with some of the decision making there, I think he's really tightened up that part of his game, and you can see the skating, the physicality, the defensive game there. Edvinsson is just a really well-rounded D, and I really liked how he played for Detroit when he was called up down the stretch. He was really under the radar there, and although Detroit was imploding, Edvinsson was playing like one of their best D, if not their best, and I thought in that situation, in a no-win situation, he did pretty well. At number 11, next up, it pains me to have William Eklund in this spot, but this is what I'm talking about. This tier is so close, it's so razor thin, that you could have him all the way up at 6, and I wouldn't even mind it, honestly. I put him at number 11 just because of some of maybe the projectable issues when it comes to reaching that next level. There are times where, again, physically there can still be problems, but I love the slipperiness. I love how he's able to use his skating to deceive and to just go all over the ice and just make things work. He's just such a really interesting player. He's so fluid with his skating, and that's somebody that I think, especially with some of the top end players coming up with San Jose, like Celebrini, like Will Smith, will be just a great complementary player there, and I think will be great in that position, and a consistent one at that for San Jose too. Now we officially jump into the top 10 and jump in with Matthew Knies of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's somebody that I also was underrated back in his draft year, but he was an interesting player that I think you really need to do your homework on, because back in 2021 he was okay for Tri-City, got 42 points in 44 games, but he was pretty sick throughout a lot of his draft year, and you could tell he wasn't really taking a lot of risks, wasn't really looking all too fast. He obviously had great physical tools, but wasn't really doing much outside of that. But Toronto obviously saw the circumstance there and knew that he could explode in a big way, and he certainly did, playing well with Minnesota and now being a great middle six producer for the Leafs, and I think will continue to be this great power forward for them, which is exactly what the doctor ordered. At number 9, I have to go with my boy Jesper Wallstedt. Even though there has been some inconsistencies this season, I still think he is the best goaltending prospect in the future in the NHL. He's somebody that I have a lot of faith in, and when he wasn't getting shelled in that first game, he actually showed up pretty well in his other couple of games in the NHL level. He's somebody to me that just brings a lot of potential with the talent, with the athleticism, with the vision and the tracking. He's somebody that I think could be a great start for many, and I hope they don't ruin him. At number 8, next up, let's go on to the Anaheim Ducks, and the first of 2 of their prospects inside the top 10, in Olen Zellweger, somebody that I've always been a pretty big fan of, but somebody that has really exploded since his draft year in terms of asserting himself, in terms of the offensive production. He was somebody that was a second round pick back then in 2021, but man, he just continued to get unreal offensive production in the WHL and in the AHL. I thought was pretty great at the NHL level, and honestly was showing some of his best defensive habits I've ever really seen him play. He was just great and showed a lot of physical strength as well, a lot more than I've ever seen him really show, and that to me is a major sign of progression. Obviously, he's a smaller player, but if he can get by defensively, that offense is going to more than make up for it. Now we go on to number 7. If we're going to talk about players that were slinging it at the end of the season, Dylan Guenther was looking like a star for Arizona in those last few weeks. You can see in 45 games, he got 35 points, 18 goals, but a lot of that production came in the final few weeks. He was looking brilliant for Arizona, and that was a great sign of progression. He was really using that shot and really using it in so many ways, and that's what I wanted to see. He was asserting himself, getting low, using that size too, which I think is one of the most underrated parts of his game, showing more muscle, showing more athleticism, and that is the biggest progression in his game. Now that he has that, Arizona with Guenther is looking pretty good, and Utah will get a pretty good one at that. Like a lot of the other players, a lot of the other young players that they have, Guenther is going to be incredible. And at number 6, you couldn't forget, you couldn't even think to not have this guy in the top 10. You couldn't think that I wouldn't have this guy in the top 10. At number 6, I got my boy Logan Stankoven, who just continues to show up and show why he was a top prospect in this draft, whether it be in the WHL, in the AHL, now in the NHL regular season, and the NHL playoffs. He's half a point per game. The dog continues to munch, and the Stankoven continues to get better and better, man. I love the intensity. I love the effort. I love the skill set and the physical play. The way he's able to battle on the wall, the way he's able to win pucks from guys that are like 6 inches taller than him. He just continues to be an absolute legend, and I love to see it. But now we're in the cream of the crop, the S tier in terms of 2021 drafted players. Next up at number 5, we have to go on to Luke Hughes, somebody that I think, even though he has issues in his game, has really just been able to bounce back from that in a lot of ways, with the offense, with the power play ability, the quarterbacking play that he has. In his first NHL season, 47 points in 82 games. He's been really good for the U.S. as well in the World Championships offensively. He's somebody that we obviously know the weaknesses of, but man, the strengths that he has are some of the best in this class, and you just got to appreciate it while it happens. Next up at number 4, we go on to a player that looks like a pretty solid pick at number 3 for the Ducks, and that is Mason McTavish. Somebody that was around more the 10 range for me, but that was just because of a lack of real sample size. We saw him at a decent level in the Swiss League, and he played pretty well in the playoffs there and was pretty good at the U18 World Juniors, but it was hard to really tell what he could be. There were times where I really liked the skill set, really liked the physical play, and other times where he was a little bit more invisible, but man, he has progressed so well since then, whether it be in the OHL, and now at the Anaheim Ducks. Just looks like a consistent power forward producer, and for Anaheim, a major part of that future. future. And number 3 next up, somebody that wasn't my number 1 prospect back in the draft, but was number 2, and that was Owen Power. And here's the thing, even though he comes in number 3, really the top 3 might as well be exactly tied. They're all going to be pretty similar in my opinion in terms of NHL potential throughout their careers. And even though I think there is some issues with Owen Power, whether it be around the net, where using his defensive body, using the God-given gifts that have been given to him, he's somebody that still has a great transitional ability, is still fantastic offensively. And even though he had a little bit of a sophomore slump, I don't think he'll be worse off. He'll still be a great NHL D for Buffalo and a consistent one too over the next couple decades. Now, coming in at number 2, this might be a little bit controversial, and maybe recency bias does play a part in this. But at number 2, I'm going to go to the player that I ranked number 1 in the draft class, and that is Matty Beniers, now of the Seattle Kraken. Kind of like Owen Power, he also had a bit of a sophomore slump, going from 57 points to 37. He turned it on in the last couple weeks, but that offense was starting to show a little bit of limitations. It started to be figured out a little bit. He was somebody that was being a little bit more one-dimensional, but started to find himself in those last few weeks, thankfully. I still love the frame. I still absolutely adore the overall ability, the two-way play he provides. One of the best, maybe overall players in this entire class, maybe even the best. He's somebody that is just very well rounded, but we'll wait to see how much offense there is. That'll be the main really decider over how well he does in this ranking in the future, is how much offense will he really be able to provide. That will be the big question here. But at number 1, somebody that really hasn't shown to have any limitations offensively and somebody that continues to produce in the NHL playoffs, we got to go to the player that was maybe the most wrong about in Wyatt Johnston of the Dallas Stars. And man, I've never been happier to be wrong. He was somebody that I ranked, I think, 40th in my final 2021 draft rankings, and somebody that has been an absolute revelation since he was drafted. He was maybe the biggest, I guess, victim of the pandemic and how that really affected players from Canada, because he didn't even play a single game in the OHL. He didn't go overseas, and the only games we saw from him were the U18 World Juniors, where he was solid. He was pretty decent, but wasn't really showing anything crazy. But after that, he had an unreal OHL campaign, and then immediately was a great NHL producer. This year, 32 goals, and in the playoffs, 7 goals, 11 points in 12 games. It's insane the turnaround we've seen here. You also just look at the draft rankings at the time, and besides Bob McKenzie, I was actually the person to rank him the highest. Even though I still saw Johnston as more of a middle 6-piece, coming from a 40th range to me to number 1 is one heck of a turnaround. And again, as a Dallas Stars fan, I will take it. The funniest part about that is that I really wanted Logan Stankoven with our pick, but man, it really worked out for me, didn't it? But those are my 2021 NHL draft rankings just a few years later. And again, this is just for fun. It's not meant to be taken so seriously. So for all the people going, why are you doing a redraft 3 years later? I just like doing it. I don't know what do you want from me? I like to have fun on this channel. Sue me. But if you did enjoy it, just like me, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and I'd love to know your thoughts down below. What do you agree? What do you disagree with? And what would your top 32 look like? Top 10, top 5? Would love to know your prospect rankings down below. Of course, make sure you share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online and all the prospect fans you guys know online as well. And click on this card for all the prospect talk in one playlist for you to binge. So much good stuff there, especially around the 2024 draft. So I highly recommend it. And I will see you in the next one. I hope you have a great hockey day, and goodbye.